Sponsored by Harder and STEENBECK, who today released this Squidmar airbrush. More on that in 5 minutes. Airbrushes can be quite scary if you've never used one, or if you just pick one up to get started. So to make your life easier, I thought I'd show you my workflow for using acrylics through an airbrush to paint your army. Also, I will take any excuse I can to make my backlog with boxes upon boxes of unpainted miniatures smaller. Some of them are from my Gloomspite Gits army that I started 2 years ago. That I painted 1 miniature for. Or 2, kinda. So let's change that. Remove some minis from my backlog while I teach you my workflow and how to use an airbrush to make your miniatures look amazing in short time. That's going to make you paint a lot faster, have a lot more fun, and get better looking miniatures. So let's get to painting. But first you gotta do the bases. Oh, done. So, on to step number 1. Once you've decided on what colors you want for your miniatures, you can super easily create base coats on all of the minis in no time, saving you hours of work. In this step, you can also create transition of colors. Like on my trolls, for example, if I want to go from the green to orange on the arms. Normally, I always start with the dark color and work my way up, but with some colors like yellows, reds, and oranges, I like to start with the mid-tone. My squigs are gonna be super colorful with different colors, spots, skin pigmentations, and my trolls are gonna be the same, but with a bit more earthy tones. Okay, you got the entire miniature covered in its base layers. And as I mentioned earlier, for me, it's super important to start with the shadow color because then it's gonna be easier to build up your highlights from that. We also have exceptions, and that is reds, yellows, and oranges. Those we don't highlight with the airbrush, we shade them, but we're coming to that. Okay, I'm ready for step number 2. We don't want to do most of our highlighting with the airbrush, but we want to add one step of Zenithal highlight on the main colors. Normally when I paint, I do highlights in maybe 3 or 4 steps, and we're just gonna do the first step with the airbrush. To get a smooth transition up to our final highlight, we're now gonna airbrush with our mid-tones. An example to this would be to highlight the Caliban green with Moot green and the dark sea blue with Zotek green. I only spray with these colors directly from above to help shape the miniature and give it volumes. And with that, we got miniatures that look quite terrible actually. And I see that way too often people stop at this step and just add a Citadel wash, and honestly to me that does not look real. And if that was the goal with the video, we'd be super successful and be done by now, but it would also look fake. Okay, on to step number 3. Okay, I hope you're as hyped as I am, because this is something that Harder and STEENBECK and I have been working on for so long. We spent so much time making the most awesome design you've ever seen on an airbrush. We've had matte gold made in a technique that's never been done on an airbrush before. We got a 360-degree integrated laser engraving. It's a squid where the head is the turning knob here at the back of the airbrush. It's so cool, and then you have the tentacles coming down on the side. I just love the design. This engraving that's all the way around has again never been done ever before on an airbrush. We've really been pushing hard to get new techniques on this one. And the design of the airbrush is based from the Evolution Silverline, but with material choices that's more akin to, say, the Infinity or the CR Plus, which is the high-endest of airbrushes. Instead of nickel plating, we have the chrome finish. We have a pressure control directly on the airbrush. This is not something common you see on most airbrushes. We have the fine liner in the front of the airbrush. We have the adjustment knob here at the back to control how much paint you spray. They've really made my dream airbrush and then just injected it with even more steroids. If you want to know more, I made an entire video covering this whole thing. You can follow that up here or just follow the link down below to pick up the airbrush. It's only gonna be available for 14 days and then it's gone forever. It's honestly a high-end airbrush in the sleekest package you've ever seen, and this is the only time you're gonna be able to get it. Now get back to the video. On to step number 4. Time to go in with a regular brush. This is the step that's going to take the most time. Block out all of the secondary colors, paint all of the wood sticks, paint all of the teeth, any leather straps you have. Add highlights with the brush locally and on bigger surfaces. Because the first highlight layer we added through the airbrush is kind of translucent, we can use the same paint pot with the regular brush. It will become more vibrant and slightly brighter than it did through the airbrush. As you can see here, when I'm painting with mood green through the regular brush that I previously shot through the airbrush. With most of these highlight colors then, I would add a little bit of ivory to bring the highlight up even more and make it more contrasty. If you already have all of the Zenithal colors though, they have these final highlights in a pre-mixed pot, but if you ask me, using ivory is the easier way because you probably already have it on your palette anyway. I'm highlighting using the volumes of the miniature and primarily using surfaces that are perpendicular to the sun. Since we in the first step only highlighted from above, we can also use that as guidance for where to add our next highlight layers. For each layer that I add, I'm adding it to an even smaller surface that's even higher up on the miniature. I've done 2 full videos covering this topic, so if you want to learn more, you can check these 2 out after this video. Make sure that none of the parts look airbrushed. The airbrush was a great base, but we need to use the paintbrush work to bring it all together. The more different textures, stipples, brush strokes you add, the less airbrushed and fake it's gonna look. But these are already looking amazing. I love how much this brush step adds, but we can take it another step in step number 5. If there's any step we want to smoothen out, we can use the airbrush to create a blend between the brush painted surface and the shadowy area we made with the airbrush. This miniature is a great example where I've used white to place the highlight on the chest and belly, and if I want to bring that down a bit, I can use the mid-tone that we sprayed earlier. In this case, it was Wraithbone from Citadel that I thinned down with about 70% airbrush medium. If you want to be even more creative and get more vibrancy and saturation, you can use an ink. Like in this case, I used a yellow ink to blend between the highlights and the midtones. As the ink is even more translucent but keeps the saturation and thus creates a perfect blend. On to one of my favorite steps, using the airbrush to create shadows and complementary colors. When you airbrush highlights, the highlight colors usually affect all of the miniature and dulls everything down and add white speckles where it shouldn't be. But when you airbrush shadows, you don't at all get the same effect. That's why we do this as a final step, enhancing the general shapes of the miniatures. Spraying with a darker color or an ink with an upwards angle from below. I love using inks and normal acrylics to get more colors in there. Reds on knuckles, elbows and knees, greens to complement any reds I have, brown tones in shadows and blacks. Your imagination is really what sets the limit here, and it's such an important step. A great example is on these two squigs, where I airbrushed magenta from below on both the green and the blue one, and that just adds a lot of saturation. It makes them look a lot more colorful and fantasy-like. And the same thing goes for this orange on this goblin. Adding magenta in the shadows just really makes stuff pop and look a lot more colorful. And this is also the step where I like to shade all of my red and yellow spectrum colors. As an example, all of my yellow I like to shade with orange ink. All of my orange I like to shade with the magenta ink. And the reds, usually what I do is I take the red color I used as my base tone, I add some black into that and then just spray from below. Okay, time for step number 7. We don't need the airbrush for this. This is just a cleaning up step and finalizing stuff to make it pop even more. I'm going in with the brush to add in highlights like ivory and whites and punching those highlights to make them maximum. I also clean up anything that I've oversprayed with the shadow color in the previous step. With finalizing, that also means that you have to paint the base, add more grass tufts, and really add to that environment that puts these miniatures in a real place. In just a few seconds I will show you how the entire Start Collecting Goblin box ended up looking, but first I want to thank all of the patrons who pledge a few dollars every month to make sure that my salary is paid. You guys are the best. If you want to help out and come hang in our Discord chat, you can check out the link down below. Also friends, don't forget to check out the Harder and STEENBECK airbrush that released today. Remember that it's only going to be available to order for 2 weeks and then it's gone forever. So if you want to have that once in a lifetime chance to get this exact airbrush, go check it out. And with that, let's do the grandest of all the grand reveals.